All right, we've got things back on track. Good to have you with us here on In Real Time. We are connecting with Julie Stewart-Binks. As I mentioned just before the break, she's in New York. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Costa. Thanks so much for having me on here today.
Oh, that's so good to have you on the program. How have you been doing lately?
Pretty good. Things are looking up in the country that I currently live in right now. And it just feels like a bit of a new day in terms of trying to get back on track in dealing with the pandemic and just, just having more love than hate, which has been sort of a big theme recently, to put things nicely.
Hey, I want to ask you about your show before I get to your observations on being quarantined in the pandemic in New York and Toronto. Your show actually caused a little bit of a stir here in Regina with a former rider talking about the smell of manure in the air. I think he was trying to be nice about things, but tell me, what was the fallout from that?
Yeah, so I host a show called Drinks with Binks. It's kind of like this, although we have drinks on it. And that can be anything from water to wine or a Negroni to coffee. And so I had former Saskatchewan Rough Rider Will Blackman on my show. And, I didn't realize that he had had a cup of coffee with the riders. And so I was so excited. I thought, oh my gosh, I don't really have many people on my show that have spent time in Regina. And I spent time there. I spent 2 years working at CTV Regina. And so I thought I have to ask him just his initial thoughts. And actually earlier in the day, I messaged a few people, one of them being Rod Peterson, that we both know well. And I said, what happened with Will Blackman? Like, he was only there for a short period of time. And he said he doesn't really like to talk about it, or he hasn't really talked about it. So I was a little bit, concerned. I didn't have a chance to ask him ahead of time. So I sort of tread lightly, like, what were your initial thoughts on Regina when you went to go play for the Riders? And of course, he what I took from it was that he likened it to Green Bay because he played for the Packers. And I thought, okay, that to my American audience, they understand what Green Bay looks like and feels like. But then, he said, when I stepped off the plane, it smelled like manure and farms and cows. And it did cause a bit of a stir in that regard for a lot of people that live in Regina, where you're like, there's not really any cows or manure around. Like, there's grain elevators and there's a lot of land, but I don't really see a lot of cows and that sort of thing. But then, and I didn't follow up on this because I hadn't prepped him for it. So I wasn't sure if he had felt comfortable talking about it. But when he did say that he liked Regina, he just didn't like the coaches.
Right.
And so I knew that right then I kind of got, in any other show, if I was, on your show or working in Regina again, that's what you want to hear from your guests. You want to hear them say that, because then you say, well, how come, or why, or how, or any of that. But I thought, after talking with Rod, I'm like, I'm just going to put this one to the side.
That's okay.
This isn't real. We're not here to sort of point fingers on who did what, where, when, why, and how. But
it must feel nice.
It did cause a stir, as you mentioned.
Well, yeah, and you know what? You're still making news here in Regina from New York. Now, I want to ask you about your observations of being quarantined, of the pandemic in New York. You've done the quarantine on both sides of the border. What are you're really, I just find your Instagram posts, your Twitter posts so interesting and perceptive of how you view the world in New York and how New Yorkers are dealing with the pandemic. Tell us a little bit of what are some of the things you've been observing there?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. So, of course, New York City was a very difficult place to be at the beginning of the pandemic because of course, the way that the virus spreads, but New York City, it's sort of like everyone's packed on top of one another. I mean, I'm living in a studio apartment. There's many people all over the place. So it's just, the spread is so easy to happen. But New Yorkers really listened. And we were so lucky to have Governor Andrew Cuomo, who every single day was giving these briefings that just sort of gave us some guidance, like, okay, yeah, you're right. Don't go outside, wear your mask all the time. This is why these things are being shut down. This is what you should be doing. And at the time, we were all just looking for information. That's all we wanted. And so that was nice. Everyone did it. And I find like New Yorkers are a lot like Canadians. They're, they've been through a lot. But they listen and they do sort of what they're supposed to do to get the right outcome. And so if you go outside in New York City right now, you will see every single person wearing a mask. We have a mask mandate in this city, and everyone follows it. And people care about one another. And if you aren't wearing your mask, a New Yorker is going to tell you to put your mask on, because New Yorkers will always say what is on their mind.
And what have you seen examples
I will
of that?
say, all the time, every single day I go outside. I was FaceTiming my mom, just showing her around New York, because it's like you'll go walking outside just to see your city again, because I haven't been able to see the city. I've just been literally inside the whole time. So I was like showing her all around the city on FaceTime, and then I'm like, see, look, every single person passing me right now has a mask on. And I found that was different, because I did go home to Toronto 2 different times in the summer and at Christmas, which means you have a 2-week quarantine. I stayed in an Airbnb downtown in Toronto, and then was able to go home. And I think that that's a good thing. I think that's very, very smart of the Canadian government. It costs money. I'm thankful that I can afford to be able to do that. And hopefully we can get to a point where maybe there's some kind of like testing out of quarantine, which we have here in New York City, where if you come into the state, you have to quarantine for 10 days. But if you quarantine for 4, you can go get a test. And if you're negative, then you're allowed to be out of it. So, everyone's still trying to figure out what the best thing is. But when I was in Toronto, I noticed more things shut down, but people aren't expected to wear masks outside. So, which I found wild, because like I have not been outside without a mask on in 10 months. I haven't even, when I go put my groceries or my garbage outside just across the hallway, I'll put a mask on just to walk like 2 steps. And so that was the biggest difference going from Canada to the US. But here, there are more things open. There is outdoor dining in New York City. The shops are open. And New York is probably considered doing this the best way possible. And we still have a lot of things that we can do. Around the country, not so much. I mean, it has taken a backseat because of the political climate and what has gone on in this country in the last couple weeks, where honestly, Costa, coronavirus wasn't even one of the top 3 stories in the national news, because we were dealing with the terrorism that really happened at the Capitol on January 6th. So now that hopefully we have the right people in charge to be able to tackle this, and even just in his first day in office with President Joe Biden being able to be an adult in charge, we got to be able to get this thing under control in this country, because this country is not dealing with it well.
But yet it seems odd to hear, because we always hear about rebel Americans not believing in the coronavirus even exists, let alone wearing masks. But you're saying New Yorkers are way more careful in wearing masks versus what you even saw in Toronto. It seems like that's not what the kind of the story we always hear about.
Well, I would say it still is true, that idea of the rebel Americans against the masks is still part of almost the identity of America as a whole, that has been built on the identity of individual freedoms. And so, the right to free speech and the right to not be able to wear a mask, not have to wear a mask, is something that has been a conflict in this country. And you do still see people like that. But I would say in New York, which is, typically a very blue state, a blue liberal city, is one that has been listening to scientists. And this pandemic has become so overly politicized, which has been, it's awful when you think about it, because just the amount of loss, because the messaging made it blue versus red instead of, right versus wrong, and doing the right thing to be able to get this thing under control. So I will say that, there are people we'll see having parties, going out, doing that sort of thing. My boyfriend and I live in this apartment. We work in this apartment. We don't do outdoor dining. We don't see our friends. We haven't seen our friends that live in this apartment building in months. And so, we're trying to do the right thing. We're probably on sort of the further end of that spectrum. But, I can't expect other people to act this way if I don't act this way.
And
it's a sort of a small price to pay.
So that's how you're observing the world from your apartment window, it seems, this pandemic world. You're also doing the show from your apartment. I've watched some of it. It looks fantastic. What's that been like for you?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, it has been very interesting. The silver lining of the pandemic is very much like your show, is that you can connect with guests all over the country, all over the world because of the nature of it being virtual. So beforehand, we'd have to book cars for guests and see who's in the city and all of these different logistical nightmares. But now we've been able to really have whoever on. And I've been able to take this literal show. This is where I sit and do it. I've been able to do it from my childhood bedroom in Toronto, from quarantine, from out east in the Hamptons, from really kind of all over the place. And so that has been the nice thing. Although, as everyone knows, working from home, it's very hard to get a separation from your workplace. So if I'm eating dinner here, I'm working out here, I'm doing my job here, I don't even know what day it is anymore. So, but that is the worries at this point. We just got to get this pandemic under control.
Yeah, because unlike a lot of people in Regina, if you're in that small little apartment with the studio taking the kitchen's as big as the bedroom kind of a thing. So I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Hey, before we wrap things up, Julie, and I know in an email to me this morning, you were so thoughtfully wanted to say something about Warren Woods, local sportscaster who passed away yesterday, longtime fixture in Regina, loved by thousands and so many people. You didn't work with him, but certainly worked in the same market and remember him. What are your thoughts on the late Warren Woods?
Yeah, I was just, I was completely shocked to hear about the passing of Warren Woods. And he was someone who was just so kind and gentle, and reading everyone's tweets and words about him, it's like he was the same person to everyone that he met and he encountered. And having worked at the competitor for him, because when he was at Global Regina and I was at CTV Regina, we always had our newscasts and we'd watch theirs and they'd watch ours. And whenever I'd go out to different events and covering different events, like Woodsy would always be like, oh, come on in, make sure you have a space in the scrum, and always ask you about your day, how are things going? Just like a genuinely good, nice, warm-hearted person. And so it just pains me to see that, that we've lost him so soon, and that it was because of COVID. And so it just, hopefully people obviously get to, see the legacy that Warren Woods has on so many people and the Regina community and beyond that, but also a reminder to really take this pandemic seriously, because it can be, any one of our friends and family that succumbed to this. And sadly it was Warren Woods, but he has left many, many very good memories for anyone that met him.
Oh, so true. Our sympathies to his family and his friends and the whole community, because the community is grieving for sure. Julie, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on your success and your wonderful programming from your apartment in New York. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Costa. I appreciate it. I'm really glad I was able to join you here on your wonderful show.
Thank you. Bye for now.